Hello. So, I am sweating right now. I have the air conditioning on, but you know what I don't have? I don't have my fan, so I'm sweating. Anyway, forget about that. We're here to talk about this. Or rather, I'm gonna talk about this. Or I'm gonna ramble about this. This is Ghost Town by Chen. This book was originally written in Chinese, and certain parts were in Taiwanese. And the edition that I'm holding right now is the Europa edition, translated English version, translated by Darryl Sterk. This book was something that I bought when I went to Taiwan 2 to 3 months ago, and I went to Elite Bookstore in Tainan. So I bought this book new. It was a new copy. Yeah, I even wrote down my name at the front page here and the dates in which I bought it, which was 15th of February 2025. So I was really diligent with that. Usually I don't do something like this, because I'm usually too lazy for this. But that time I was really enthusiastic, you know what I mean? And so I got my friend to choose a book from a stack, my next TBR, and he chose this book. And yeah, I ended up taking a long time to read this book. And why is that? I would talk about that shortly. But anyway, what is this book about? So this is a domestic fiction. Most of the novel takes place in Taiwan, but there are also certain parts that takes place in Germany. So it follows this main character named Keith. So Keith is a man from Taiwan, and at the beginning of this book, we learn that Keith returns to Taiwan from Germany, and apparently what happened in Germany was that he killed his boyfriend, and as a result, he was incarcerated in prison, and he was eventually released, and he returned to Taiwan. So one of the mysteries that this book is trying to sort of unravel to us is, why exactly did he kill his boyfriend? Like, what really happened with their relationship there? And I would say the approach that this book takes in answering that question would be to take us down memory lane and look at Keith's family history in Taiwan, explains indirectly the kind of like the psychological effect of his upbringing in Taiwan on his kind of like eventual situation when he's an adult, like what's all these things that's going on with the murder and also the incarceration. So basically, what exactly happened with Keith and his family that influenced him, that affected him, that turned him into this kind of a person that we are seeing now in this book. So, but that's not all, actually. While this novel kind of tells us Keith's upbringing, we also find out that Keith also has other siblings. So specifically, he has 5 other sisters and 1 brother. Now, these 5 sisters, their names are Barbie, Beverly, Betty, Belinda, and also the younger sister named Plenty, and the other brother is named Heath. So aside from Keith, 4 sisters whose names all starts with the letter B, Betty, Belinda, Barbie, and Beverly, occupy a significant portion of this book with their stories. All these sisters would eventually have like sort of different fates in their life, sort of like in terms of the domestic life, their marriage and all that. The younger sister Plenty and also the other brother Heath also have a bit of their story being explored in this book, but they don't really occupy as much space as Keith and his four sisters. And we would eventually also learn, like aside from what's going on with Keith, we also learned about what's going on with these siblings and their entire family dynamics with each other, together with their their relationship with their father and also with their mother, and basically people that are kind of like living close to them in this small Taiwanese town called Yongjing, which is kind of like the childhood town of Keith. So yeah, basically we're seeing like the childhood scenes of these characters and what would eventually happen to them because of these things as they are growing up. So it's an interesting story because it has that really interesting premise of exploring different characters through their childhood all the way until they're adults, and how a person's childhood and upbringing influences them. It's kind of basic, but I think that that's also part of the appeal. Like I like that kind of story because it really gives provides this opportunity for kind of like readers to really explore each character in a surgical way, their psychology, which I think it's always really fun. That said, I mentioned earlier that I took a long time to read this book, which was like more than 1 month. I actually expected to read this book within a week. Even my friend who chose this book as my next TBR for me, he thought that I was going to finish this book within 5 days. Obviously, he did not know me that well. I did not finish it within 5 days. But there were some aspects of this book that I didn't particularly enjoy. They kind of detracted a little bit from my reading experience. So the most major one would probably be the stories of the sisters. Now, as I mentioned, there are 4 sisters who occupy significant space in this book. So we have Belinda, Beverly, Barbie, and Betty. So all of these sisters have their names starts with B. It's a translator's choice. We'll talk about that later. But for now, we look at the stories. I don't want to give you details about each of these sister stories, other than the fact that they all would eventually have like their own unique stories. They all have their own differences in terms of what eventually happens to them and their station in life, and their struggles. All of those things are unique, okay, which so far so good, right? But the problem is that all of their stories, when it's being told, have this really similar tone and atmosphere, which ends up making these sisters just sort of kind of like blend into one another, which is a big no to me, because because of this, the stories of these sisters, which occupy a significant portion of this book, ends up becoming like a sort of monolithic story of 4 individuals who sound like one individual, even though if we really look at the stories, they are all different. But the way that they the way that they talk, the way that they sound, the way that these stories are presented, the emotional weight attached to these stories, or the tones attached to these different sisters' lives, they sound very similar to each other. And it sort of feels like you're having one story in which it's about all of these 4 sisters, and then you have another story about Keith. You have stories about some of the minor characters, but I just don't like the fact that these 4 sisters just sound really, kind of the same, because I do find that their stories, individual stories, to be really interesting, really intriguing. They have very compelling struggles, and I think that what I read just felt like it was a missed opportunity in really exploring all of these sisters in as their own characters. It feels as if they as characters kind of lost their agency and lost their own individuality. So that's the part that I would say really detracted from my experience. And also another result of that would be the book kind of felt boring, because every time I read a story regarding one of the sisters, I would forget which sister is it about. I find it really difficult to associate which story is for which name, because all of the names are written with, all of the names start with B. But of course I'm going to talk about that later, because I do have a different problem with that, with the names. Another quality of this book, which I would say is not really something that I dislike, I thought it was interesting, I just kind of want to point out, I forgot to mention it earlier, is that the perspective of the narrative perspectives in this book change a lot. So basically, with each chapter, it's totally possible that you will jump in perspective. Sometimes it can get kind of confusing. Like, sometimes it's probably a dead person talking, sometimes it's a living person talking, sometimes it's another living person talking, sometimes it changes to a different dead person talking. So you do have this combination of living narrators and also kind of like dead, ghostly narrators. Ghost is like a really common motif in this book. You get different kinds of interpretations of ghosts, like actual spectral ghosts, and you also have something there like psychological ghosts, emotional ghosts, whatever thing that can be associated with the word ghost, it can appear in this book. But yeah, the perspective of the narrators really change, and so because of that, there is this kind of like effect that it gives to readers that makes it feel kind of hallucinatory in a sense. Like it makes the entire book just feels kind of like hazy, smoked, ethereal, sort of like it kind of makes you wonder, like every time you move to a new chapter, you'll be like, okay, now who's talking? It's confusing, but it's a good kind of confusing. It's different from the earlier confusion about the 4 sisters story that I mentioned, because that one is not the good kind of confusing. This one, the shifting perspective, that is a good kind of confusing. I think it is stylish, and yeah, kind of fun. It can be a bit of a struggle. Some readers might struggle with that, but I find that it's very interesting. Fun and stylish. Anyway, let's talk about another issue that I have with this book, and that would be the names of the characters. I actually read the translator's note, and in the translator's note, the translator actually explained why they decided to kind of change the names of the characters, like from the original Chinese name to the Western names that we have in here. So the main character Keith, his name is not exactly Keith in the original Chinese version. It was like a Chinese name, just like any other characters as well. And while I can understand why those choices are made, I do think that as a reader, it for me personally, it was not effective. Because one is that somehow there's something about these names that just don't ring true to me. Something about these names just feel kind of contrived. Like, okay, so we have a character named Keith. Okay, these characters are from these small Taiwanese town. Like, it makes sense for Taiwanese to have Western names as well. I'm aware of that. But at the same time, it's like the way that the names in this book are being used. You know, their family members are using these names to refer each other, right? And then their neighbors use these names. And basically everyone just kind of like refer to each other using these English names, which kind of feels a little bit strange. when you read it, it kind of makes it difficult to kind of suspend disbelief when you see characters interact with each other and they use these translator chosen Western names. Right? You have these sisters being referred to as like Barbie and Beverly. Like, okay, not to mention that these sisters have B as the at the beginning of their names, which makes it a little bit confusing to read. But there is a reason for that, because I think in the Chinese version, their Chinese names also have a certain kind of like similarities with each other, like certain parts that are in common, if I'm not mistaken. So, because they're siblings, which makes sense. But it's the fact that these names are just, sometimes it feels kind of out of place. Sometimes it just feels like it's a little bit fake. It feels like it was so obviously a translated effort. And then you have the younger sister named Plenty, and another brother named Heath. The father's name is Cliff, and the mother's name is Cicada, which is, to me isn't effective. Yeah, I would say I would have preferred if the original names are retained, and maybe transliterated from the original Chinese name, and then perhaps add, like, at the back of the book, like the appendix, what are the significance of these names, like what are the meaning and the possible symbolism that they carry on the characterization, and what the characters would eventually do in this novel, like how do their names relate to them as characters, but in the appendix. That would be interesting. Instead, what I ended up getting is that, and I feel like this is usually why for translated Chinese work, names are being translated, because I think the translator is kind of trying to highlight the symbolism of these names. But what it ended up doing for me is that I feel like I'm being hammered on the head by the symbolism of it all. Like, you got a father named Cliff, and there's a reason for that. And I kept being reminded that this father is named Cliff because of this, because of this, because of this. And it's like, enough with the symbols, I know. Okay, let's just keep that for post-mortem booktube discussion. Okay, I don't want to know this, about the symbols every time the name of the character is mentioned. Like, okay. Anyway, yeah, that is a bit of a rant about the names of the characters in this book. But I also don't want to rant too much about this book. I'm putting down this book because my hand is a bit sore now. My arm is sore. Not my hand, my arm. But anyway, I just kind of want to mention something else about this book, which I find very... something that I want to note, something positive about it, is that the story of Keith in this book, despite all of the things that are vented about, Keith's story, I think, was written in this very passionate way. Like, you could really feel that there is this sincerity in exploring Keith as a character. And I'll just add that Keith's story is it's kind of like a classic gay story in a sense. Like, it's a classic story about gayness, queerness, the gay experience basically. And you could really feel that the sincerity in this particular story that I didn't particularly feel in like stories involving the four sisters, for example. So I like that. You can really see that Keith is like the main focal point of this novel. So if you are interested in reading a story that I would say dissects a kind of like an example of a kind of like gay story set in a kind of like a different context, like for example in this case set in a small Taiwanese town. This book is a nice example of that. I just don't really like how, in contrast to how well Keith's story is written, the four sisters story are just kind of like they just feel like they, their voices just kind of melt into each other, which doesn't seem very fair to me, because their stories also highlight similar things that Keith's story highlights, which is the effects of patriarchy on kind of like the growth, the upbringing of children, and how they would end up growing up and perceive their surrounding. I think this book at its core really tries to address the impact of kind of like how the certain perverted aspects of patriarchy can really negatively influence children. So and also misogyny, that part, because that affects the lives of these sisters because they are women, and also Keith because he's gay. So I actually gave this book like 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, but it might as well be like 3 out of 5 stars. But in any case, I would still recommend this book if you are interested in reading, for example, a book about miserable families or miserable people. If you like that kind of book, this is it. This is one of those books you can try. If you like a book that is about the gay experience, that I personally think is written with passion, this is also another book that you can try. Or if you like a book that is kind of like stylish in how it's written, with its ghostly voices and all that. I mean, the ghostly aspect of this book can sometimes feel a little bit on the nose, but it has flair. So definitely try this also. Oh, by the way, something about the title. The title is called Ghost Town, and then I just learned that the original title is 鬼地方, which has some very layered meaning. I personally think that Ghost Town just feels so neutral. The tone of this entire book, because of how it is about miserable people, so this entire book just overall has that kind of very strong resentment, dislike, dissatisfaction, just kind of permeating the entire atmosphere of this book. Like all those negative emotions, anger, sadness, unhappiness, all of those things just really permeates the entire book. That is the vibe that you can expect reading this book. But the title, Ghost Town, just feels kind of, neutral. Oh, what is that town? It's a ghost town. Okay, I don't want to go there. So it's just kind of like that. But the Chinese title, Gui Ti Fang, actually has that kind of, actually fits the tone of this book. So I personally would think that, maybe something like, maybe if it were to be translated into this godforsaken ghost town, okay, maybe the translation want to highlight how ghost plays a role in here, so maybe we ghost is retained in the title. So Gui Ti Fang means ghost place, like literally ghost place, but it also means this effing place, like if you add gui in whatever, like usually it kind of means like this stupid thing or this lousy thing, this expletive thing, and it carries that kind of negative emotional feeling on, with that speech. So when you add gui or ghost in whatever thing you want to express. So yeah, Gui Ti Fang, this fucking ghost town, that would be what I think the original title wants to convey. But ghost town is just kind of like, so kind of like that emoji like neutral face. But anyway, that's all I think I want to talk about this book. Let me know if you have read this and what you think about it. Like, did you enjoy it or did you not enjoy it? Did you have a love-hate relationship with this book? That's what I'm curious about, because I definitely did have that kind of relationship with this book. And so obviously the star rating was really reductive. I hope I could explain, the minutia of my love-hate with this book. And maybe you have your own interesting experience with this book as well. Let me know if you have any of those experience, or if you just want to read this book, or if you want to talk about something else. How's your day? Did you eat fried chicken today? So yeah, I guess that's all I want to talk about in this video. So I'll see you again in a different one. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.